What is going on, gunfighters? Several weeks of some pretty long training, but good training for the private contracting job. Anyway, it is a day off for me, so I thought I'd get some new content recorded for you guys. Now, I've been trying to put out some new content every weekday for the patrons when I wasn't getting as much new out for you guys. But here we are, some new content. How about bolt actions for survival? Bolt action survival rifles. That's what we're going to talk about today. So if that interests you, stay tuned. I'm going to do a real rapid fire bio. I mean, even faster than normal. And we'll get into the main topic. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, leave some stars, and please share with somebody you think will appreciate this episode. Blessed to have served in military, law enforcement, combat veteran, private contractor, competition shooter, lifelong hunter, guide. Blessed by God that He got me through all those things so I could share this firsthand training, knowledge, experience with you to serve you today. Let's dive into the podcast. Alright, so let's get into this episode of Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, survival, ballistics, all manner of things the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. If you can read between the lines on that quick bio, you might surmise I know my way around a bolt gun. Bolt guns, let's be clear, would not be my number one pick for the apocalypse. Right? That is not my number one pick. I'm not saying that it should be. That's not why I'm doing this episode. I'm doing this episode because it is a lot of people's choice. A lot of people, because of either legislation or they're just comfortable with it, there shall not be infringed has, let's just say, been infringed. And so that is some people's choice for what they would pick for the end of the world as we know it. If you are in that camp or you are considering being in that camp where you think a bolt action rifle is the best choice, that's okay. That's kind of what today's topic is about. What is your best choice in that arena, in that bolt action rifle arena? That's what we're going to talk about today. Also, another caveat, we are talking about center fire rifles. I've talked about on other episodes, probably several times, about rimfire rifles and their role in survival. We're not talking about bolt action rimfires here. We're talking about bolt action center fire rifles. And the way I've got this episode laid out in the outline is I'm going to talk about some really, really good choices. And then, kind of the end, we'll talk about optics, we'll talk about caliber, and we'll talk about commonality. Like, what makes a good choice? What are some of the defining characteristics that are common to most, maybe not all, but most of the choices that we're going to talk about today? Now, an obvious place to start is the scout rifle. Baby, what's a scout rifle?
It's a rifle for scouts.
Yes, it is a rifle for scouts, and as such, it fits handily, not perfectly, but handily into the kind of apocalyptic genre, shall we say. A lot of people, I think, over-romanticize the scout rifle. It's not meant to be a main battle rifle. It's not meant to be a battlefield, go toe-to-toe with an AK, with an AR, with even a FOWL or an M1A. It's not meant to do that. It's a rifle for scouts. But as such, it is meant to be able to deal with an adversary if necessary, but also to survive out in the bush for extended periods of time, which you might deduce would also come in handy for the end of the world as we know it, man. A lot of the things that people like and that were part of the criteria for a scout rifle: light, handy, maneuverable, the ability to feed it. These things also are handy in an apocalypse rifle. Now, there are many companies and many over the years that have made a scout rifle. I'm not going to bury the lead. My number one pick for this is the rifle that I have because I did a lot of research. I didn't just pick it by happenstance. And that is the Ruger Gunsight Scout Rifle. For a couple of reasons. One big one is it comes in stainless steel. We're talking about the end of the world, man. We're not talking about polishing a finely blued steel rifle. I hunt hard now. I beat the crap out of guns and break guns now. Right, I want my gun to be robust, and I like stainless. The Ruger Gunsight Scout Rifle comes in stainless. And also a big feature for me is that it comes in controlled round feed. Now, I've done a whole episode on controlled round versus push feed. But controlled round feed is generally considered more reliable, especially by like people whose the things that they're hunting is going to eat their face off. Like lions and tigers, dangerous game hunters, Alaskan bear guides. Not exclusively, but there is a big chunk of that very small subset of people that really like controlled round feed rifles, and I like controlled round feed rifles. Now here's the deal. I don't think that you should choose a bolt action. I started out with this. If you can have a good, reliable semi-auto. But one of the few advantages you would get with a bolt action over a semi-auto is its rugged, robust action. Like just nasty, dirty, harsh conditions and still operating well. It's one of the reasons it hung around in the military for a big chunk of the 20th century when there were faster designs. Because they can be so rugged and robust. And many of those rugged and robust designs are controlled round feed. So if you're going to choose one, why wouldn't you go, if you're talking about the end of the world, with a really rugged, proven design like controlled round feed? And going back to the Ruger Gunsight Scout, it comes in stainless and it comes in controlled round feed. Those are two of the big reasons that I chose it, because for a long time I wanted to try the true scout rifle genre. And so that's what I picked. So I'm not going to bury the lead. If you're looking, I would start looking there, unless you have other reasons. The Ruger Gunsight Scout Rifle. It comes in a couple of different models. One of the things about the Scout Rifle that you may or may not want that I think is kind of dated is the forward-mounted optic. There's a lot of reasons for that. I don't want to turn this into a Scout Rifle episode. You may or may not want that, but I wouldn't count it out. There are maybe more than a couple, maybe a few decent Scout Rifle optics available. But that's one of the big things that hurts it nowadays. I think that the time that forward-mounted optic made more sense at the time. It makes less sense now, but I wouldn't discount it. And with the Ruger Scout Rifle, and the next one we're going to talk about, there is provisions where you can mount a traditional optic. And perhaps one of the best things about the Scout Rifle, other than what we aforementioned, is that it has good, usable iron sights. Most bolt-action rifles today, sadly, don't come with iron sights, which to me is a lot like modern vehicles, modern cars that don't come with a spare tire. Come on. Really? Come with a spare tire. Make a good bolt-action rifle with iron sights. You'd think that would be a no-brainer, but sadly today, the vast majority of bolt-action rifles don't come with iron sights. You're talking about the end of the world. Maybe a piece of glass or a couple of pieces of glass that might break is not what I want to count my life on. I would want an optic primarily on an end-of-the-world rifle. It's a force multiplier, but if and when it breaks, I want to be able to take it off and throw it away and still use the rifle. So that's kind of a big deal to me. Iron sights, and the Scout Rifle has that. Now again, I don't want to turn this into a Scout Rifle episode, but my second choice would be the Steyr Scout Rifle. It's got some cool features. You can store an extra magazine in the buttstock. It's got a built-in bipod. It's got some cool stuff. Even though it came about in the 90s, I think maybe 1990. Double check that, I'm not sure. But early 90s, the Scout Rifle came out. It still looks like it's from the future. Whereas the Ruger looks kind of like more traditional. It looks strange, but it would fit into, most people think of it as like a hunting bolt-action rifle. The Steyr Scout looks like like what they would carry on the space shuttle if they were cool enough to carry rifles on the space shuttle. That's kind of what it looks like. But it's also a good rifle, but it's not controlled round feet. But if you want to look there as well. Similar things that I've said. I looked for a long time, and I do like it less than the Ruger. but it's a really good option. It's probably my second choice. So you might look into the Steyr Scout. It does have one of the benefits that it comes in a lot more calibers than the Ruger. So that is an advantage if you want to look at different calibers. Neither one of those rifles is what I would call a budget rifle. So if you're on a budget, or even if not, there are some reasons you might want to go with this next rifle, and that is the Mossberg MVP. The Mossberg MVP has been around a while. I remember when one of my good buddies who's now passed away first got one. And I was like, what is this abomination? But it's a pretty cool rifle. It's got a lot going for it. It's kind of like if a bolt action and an AR-15 had a baby. It takes AR mags. If you're talking about the 223, now they make it in 223 or 308. So, but if you wanted something that took AR mags, we'll get the calibers later, but it's got that going for it. It's affordable. I think it even has like an AR type flash hider. It's got, again, iron sights, which is a big deal to me. You can mount optics on it, which again is a big deal to me. I want both. I don't want to have to choose one or the other. I would like both. Yes, please. Redundancy is good in normal times. Redundancy is even better if you're talking about the end of the world and that's your one long gun. So the Mossberg MVP, and unlike the other ones, the Mossberg MVP is not very expensive. At least I wouldn't consider it very expensive for a bolt-action rifle. It's a good, affordable bolt-action rifle. Do I think that it's just as good as? A lot of times we fall into this fallacy of, I want this thing and this is what I can afford and I'm going to pretend it's just as good as. I don't think it's just as good as the other two options I just mentioned, but I think it's a good option, and I think it's a good option for the money. It's not stainless that I'm aware of. It's not controlled round feed. It's not as cool and space agey as a Steyr, but the Mossberg MVP is a good, I think, working man's apocalyptic bolt action choice, especially if it's going to be primarily, until the end of the world happens, a truck gun and hang out in the back of your truck and get beat up. Now, I'm not one of the ones that goes budget on a truck gun because that's just not me. But if you feel more comfortable with a budget gun bouncing around in the back of your truck, then this is also a good option. It would also be a good ranch rifle in the meantime. But that Mossberg MVP, one of the things I like about this, I think more than the other options, even the front runners I mentioned, is that it's got a pretty long rail on top. So you could mount all kinds of different ways on that gun, which is pretty cool. Again, it's a pretty neat option for what it is. Now, I didn't mention it in the Scout rifle, but Savage also makes a Scout rifle. I didn't mention it because it's a bit heavy, but not a bad choice. Also, not nearly as expensive as the two Scout rifles I mentioned, the Scout rifle. They also just come out with a new model, the Magpul Scout, which is even heavier, which is one of the things I don't like about it. Now, I like Savage. Savage makes a good product, and every Savage bolt gun I've ever had has been crazy accurate. Like, if I'd have spent 3 or 4 times as much money on it, I think I would be happy with the accuracy of it. They've all been crazy accurate. I imagine if you want a really, really accurate Scout rifle, even though it's cheaper, it's probably up there for the Savage Scout rifle. But Savage makes a model that I think I would choose above the Scout rifle because, again, I think the forward-mounted optic is kind of not obsolete, but maybe antiquated is a better word. They make one called the Hog Hunter. And the Hog Hunter is pretty much, to me, a quasi... Man, this is going to make a Scout rifle community blow up and have a conniption, but it's kind of in that same vein, except for you mount a traditional rear-mounted optic, which many would say writes it off as a Scout rifle. But if you like that kind of idea, the Savage Hog Hunter is a really, really well thought out rifle. And again, unlike most, it comes with iron sights. And not just fastidial like #MeToo iron sights. I mean good usable iron sights. They're not crazy expensive. They're, again, a good option. They have adjustable length of pull, which is a big deal to me. Which I should mention, a lot of the other ones we already mentioned also do. It's also available in some cool calibers. You check that out on your own. But Not as many as the Steyr, but you got a few options there. The Hog Hunter. Alas, it is not stainless, which really saddens me. The weight is good though, 7.06 pounds by looking at the one I'm looking at here. It may vary depending on caliber, but it's not heavy. It's 7.3 pounds, another model I'm looking at. So a good option. And again, Savages, everyone I've ever seen has been superbly accurate. I should mention also comes with the threaded barrel. So you got a threaded barrel, you got good iron sights. Probably going to be crazy accurate. It's got the AccuTrigger, probably going to have a pretty good out-of-the-box trigger. Which I'll be honest, my number one pick, the Ruger, did not. It wasn't hard to do a trigger job on, but out of the box, it was nothing to write your mama about. So, the Savage Hog Hunter, I think, really flies under the radar. I don't think a lot of people even consider it, but I think a phenomenal option. Now, another genre I'm going to talk about is, I mentioned a lot of modern bolt-action rifles don't come with iron sights, but that wasn't always the case. Now, I'm going to mention a few models particularly. The older Winchester Model 70 featherweights, of which I'm blessed to have an original Pre-64, which if I had to choose a bolt-action, it would be my second choice. It's got a fantastically superb, if I'm being honest, a smoother, slicker action than the new Ruger. It's like butter. It's gorgeous, but it's blued steel, and I know me, and I know how hard I use guns. For that reason alone, I don't like it as much. But if blued steel is not a concern for you, it's called the rifleman's rifle. If you get an older one, you can get a Winchester Model 70 with iron sights. You can get them in a lot of different calibers. You can also get the new Alaskan model, which is very much like the older one, which has iron sights. Now you're talking about a wood stock and blued steel, so maybe not as rugged, but I mean, you're splitting hairs because there's plenty of... I still have a Winchester Model Pre-64. It's still going strong. There's probably plenty, and they're still very coveted to tell you how good they are. It seems kind of a shame to get one but you could get one and put a polymer stock on it or a laminated stock on it and Cerakote it, and you could do that, and it would have the iron sights. You could also do the same thing with a Remington Model 700. Now, 700 is a push feed. I like it less, but they are inherently more accurate, I do believe. And they are very strong. They do break, but that's one of the great things about the 700 is they're common. They're maybe one of the most common bolt-action platforms on the planet. So, I mean, keep an extra extractor. That's one of the few things that break on that rifle. They are known for breaking extractors, but again, they're cheap enough. Get a spare and throw it in the stock if you're talking about the apocalypse. Break 2 extractors, you're doing pretty good living that long in the apocalypse. So maybe just get a spare extractor. It doesn't get rid of a lot of the malfunctions that are more common to a push feed than a control round feed, but the 700 is a good action. And a lot of the older 700s are going to have good iron sights. So an older 700 or an older Model 70. I'm sticking with those two because those are by far the most prolific. That I just did one on epic gun battles. That's one of the most epic American gun duels in the 20th century. The Winchester Model 70 or the Remington 700, both are good. Find an older one with iron sights. That's a lightweight version, a lightweight variant. Let's say the featherweight version of the Winchester Model 70. Or maybe a youth model of the Remington 700. But either one of those would be a solid choice. Now, there are some, again, those are the big two, but if you found an older, Browning A-bolt with iron sights, or you found an older Ruger M77 with iron sights, I'd say rock on. Those are also good choices. Some of the other cool choices, I mentioned the featherweight, if you're looking at a Model 70. But Remington made some less popular models that might actually be better for this. One are the Mohawk rifles. You may look those up, the 600, the 660, the 673, I believe. They're all kind of in that same genre. Those would be fantastic. And the Remington Model 7. Instead of the 700, the Model 7 is a lighter, handier variant. a really good option for this. But you're getting away from, I don't know how many of the parts interchange between that and the 700. If it takes the same bolt, same extractor, that's probably most of the stuff that's going to break. So that's a really handy, beautiful rifle, the Remington Model 7. Another really cool one is the Tikka Arctic. Tikka makes a fine rifle, and if you want a cheap, budget, accurate, out-of-the-box, smooth action rifle, the Tikka is it. The Tikka T3 is a fantastic rifle. It is a kind of one of the heavyweights, not as far as actual weight of the gun, but as far as taking up a big market share of modern bolt-action rifles. The Tikka T3 is a fantastic rifle for what it is. I don't think it's as good a choice for this. Again, most of the models don't come with iron sights. However, the Canadian Ranger rifle you might find as the Tikka Arctic, that is a beautiful, beautiful rifle. My issue with it is that it's basically a Tikka T3, which is a budget rifle, but that Tikka Arctic, if you can find one, it's really, really expensive. And what you're basically getting is a Tikka T3 with iron sights and a cool looking stock. But cool looking, not a primary concern for me. That's a secondary thing. Nothing wrong with being cool looking. It's not a war crime to look good. But you're basically paying way, way, way more money for the Arctic variant because the Canadian Rangers use it and it's cool and it comes with iron sights. But are you willing to pay, a couple of $1,000s for a $600-700 rifle because it has iron sights? You get what I'm saying there? But it's really cool. It's a really, really good option. And again, that Tikka, they're accurate and they have a smooth action. Probably the smoothest action of anyone that I've mentioned so far. Maybe the Steyr, I'd have to run them side by side, but it's a smooth, smooth action. It is a push feed, but I do believe that extractor is a little bit beefier and a little bit better than the Remington 700. Not all push feeds are considered equal in my eyes when it comes to extractor issues. The Tikka T3 and its variants have a pretty beefy extractor. Another one, kind of a newcomer, is going to be the S.R.T. And it's called the S.R.T Rover Scout. And it is very intriguing. It is a good looking rifle. It looks elegant. It looks sleek. The weight is right. The price is right. You know that if you've listened, if you're a normal, regular listener, you know that one of my general rules for a gun you're going to trust your life to or somebody else's life to is the 3-year rule. I don't care who it is. Glock, Smith & Wesson, Colt, some of the best manufacturers under the firmament on the earth have issues with new models when they come out. From, again, Glock to Colt to whomever. This is a new rifle. I don't think it's quite hit the 3-year mark yet. So it's unproven. If it pans out, if you listen to this episode in a couple of years and it's proven, or you think that the apocalypse isn't going to happen for a couple of years and you have time to test it, it's got some cool stuff going for it. It has the rail, if you don't know, a lot of times on a rifle, not to insult your intelligence, but I've realized that I have listeners of all different levels of gun knowledge, gun IQ, if you will, gun experience. Usually you have a receiver and you put mounts, like a lot of times you'll put like a Weaver mount, and then you'll put scope rings, and then you'll put the scope. This has the standard 1913 rail built right into the receiver, which makes it simpler and less moving parts, which I like, again, in normal times. But if you're talking about, apocalypse, that's a really cool feature. So that is really cool. That S.R.T Rover Scout, again, has potential. Here's another issue with it, though, is that I don't know that it shares many parts in common with many other rifles. Now, it's a bolt action. Bolt actions don't break that often. However, if something does break, again, the Remington 700, although it breaks not often, but it's known to break extractors, they're common. So that's a downfall to some of these more niche or off the beaten path rifles. Now, if you just got to be the cool guy, you don't want to run what anybody else runs. The odds of you running into somebody else with a S.R.T Rover Scout when you're fighting off the hordes of zombie prairie dogs or zombie gray squirrels, chipmunks, depending on what region of the country you're in. Right, whatever the case is. The odds of you running into somebody with a S.R.T Rover Scout, pretty unlikely. So if being the cool guy with the niche thing, you want to run the S.R.T rifle with the, I don't know, whatever the equivalent hipster camo would be, the Alpenflage, and that's what you want in the apocalypse, and some Italian leather boots, rock on, man. It's a cool, intriguing option. Again, it's not proven, but it's probably, and I'm not going to bet my life on probably, but it's probably a good rifle. I just don't know yet. It does, again, have a lot of the features that I like. It's got the iron sights. It looks like good iron sights. It also has a rail so you can mount traditional optics or forward-mounted optics. It's got an adjustable stock in different ways. The weight, it seems good. Detachable box magazines with decent capacity. Good potential there. Now, let us talk about the milsurp, because a lot of people that think about bolt actions for survival, they're going to think, why not the old proven milsurp rifles? Well, a couple of reasons why they wouldn't be my first choice. They are a lot of times built like tanks. A lot of times they kind of weigh like tanks also, though. They're heavy. And they're often big. Look at the Mosin Nagant, like the old 9130s. A tactical telephone pole. I guess one of the benefits would be if you had 3 guys that were armed with Mosin Nagants and bayonets, you could probably put them together and use them as a teepee. You kill some radioactive bison and, make your own apocalyptic teepee. That's how big those guns are. They are big. They are heavy. And despite what you might think in the lure, many of them are pretty inaccurate. We're talking a standard for the day for a lot of these World War II era rifles, which were good rifles at the time, is like 4 MOA. Some of you might argue and think, well, mine shoots this or mine shoots that. That's fine. But I'm talking about the standard of the day. If you look at the old military standards for these old military rifles, it's like 4 MOA. How many of you today are happy with a 4 MOA rifle? And answer that honestly before you start trying to justify these old milsurp guns. They're big, they're heavy. They are rugged and robust, I'll give them that. However, and they do have good usable iron sights. And if you're only an iron sight guy, that's fine. But again, I kind of want both. I kind of want the option of a force multiplier, of a modern optic on a rifle, but also good iron sights. And although some of these rifles you can mount an optic on, a lot of them are kludgy. A lot of the mounting systems they had are nowhere near as good and robust as the mounting systems that we have today. Look at like a Mosin Nagant sniper, which are some of the best Mosin Nagants. That was a good optic and a good setup for the time, but it's kind of crap compared to today's standard for mounting optics and having a good usable optic. And a lot of the workarounds we have for these older military rifles are just that, they're workarounds. They were never intended to mount good modern optics. Also, a lot of the triggers on them are pretty bad. So there's that. So you got weight, you got accuracy, you got inability to mount optics. You got a lot of downsides. Now that said, if you find a decent old sporterized rifle, a lot of these post-war, because they were cheap and readily available, because World War II had a lot of rifles in it and a lot of them came back as surplus. A lot of them are cheap. Not as cheap as they used to be, right? If we were having this discussion 20, 30 years ago, that would be a big advantage, but probably not today. If you got a Mosin Nagant when they were under $100 and you still have it, then that's fine, but many of these other rifles are going to be far more expensive. Guys, look what a decent condition 1903 costs. And they have good iron sights, I'll give you that. But they're also heavy. And if you look at what a good condition 1903 costs, you can get a lot of other rifles on this list that we talked about that, unless you just want it for nostalgia, and nostalgia is probably not saving you in the apocalypse. Right? Again, I'm not saying you're wrong, but it wouldn't be my first choice. If you find an old sporter like a 1903, especially if you live in a country that was part of, the British Empire long after we separated from the British Empire, but we'll get to calibers later, but 303 British, and you live in a place where that's the predominant caliber still, then that makes more sense. Probably not finding a lot of these modern scout rifles and stuff in 303 British. It's pretty outdated. But if you live in a part of the world where that's the main caliber, then that makes more sense for you. But if you find like an old sporterized American 1917 or British 303 SMLE of whatever pattern, and it's already sporterized and it has a good optics mount on it and it's cheap and it might be heavy, but you get the idea. I'm not saying it's the worst option, but I'm saying it's not even in the top of the list for me. Really, any milsurp rifle. If you're really on a budget and you really find a good deal on an old beat up, Mosin M44 carbine, which probably still weighs more than a lot of these rifles that are on the list today, maybe, but again, you're not really going to run optics. So again, not my first choice, so I'm not going to go down the list on all the different milsurp options there are out there. Not my first choice, but not the worst choice either. Like if you say to me 1903, well, I would say to you, get a Winchester Model 70 featherweight that we already talked about. It's a lot newer, same action, basically, not an exact copy, but they look at the lineage of it. Probably more accurate, probably lighter, good iron sights, good ability to mount good modern optics. So just one example. Now, we could go one of two places. We could go to caliber or we could go to optics. I guess let's go to caliber. My number one choice, and I put this out as a question as I was working on this on the Patreon page. We do stuff like this all the time on the Patreon page. You can go there. A lot of stuff is public like this was. You can vote. You can still go back after you listen to this if you want and vote. I have to scroll through some Patreon paid members only stuff, but it'll be on there. What would your caliber be for bolt action of the apocalypse? No surprise, it was my choice. It was many people's choices, and I voted after many of the people voted, so I didn't skew the numbers. But 308. 308 is the most versatile center fire common rifle caliber, period. You may argue that there are some better ballistically calibers, and I would say, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of better calibers ballistically. But as far as economy of scale and being a versatile caliber, 308 is the bee's knees, baby. It's where it's at. It is economy of scale, really affordable, really available, which if we're talking about this kind of role is really important. It's also really capable. It's not as versatile as the 30-06, which would also be a good option for this. It's not as versatile, but it's way more available and more affordable. Not just in ammo, which is a thing, but also in the amount of rifles, modern rifles it's available in. Like a lot of these scout rifles we talked about, they're not going to be available in Alt-6, but they will be available in 308. Also, it's a NATO caliber, which has some advantage. Not because I have a lot of love for NATO, but because that means it's a lot of military ammunition made in it. The 308 is kind of the standard. Now, let me give you the numbers here. 308 got 57% of the total vote. The options were 308, 223, 30-06, 65 Creed, and other. The second most popular one came in at 29% of the vote with the 223-556. Now, pray tell, with the mighty power of the 308, why might one choose a 223-556? Well, the same reason the military did. They went from 308 to 556. Now, I would still choose, again, 308 is my number one choice. But you may fall into the camp of 223-556. We talked about the standard AR mags, which are cheap and common and available, and some of the guns we talked about take the AR magazine. Also, we talked about cost availability of ammo. I mean, even though the 308 is common and available, it's not as cheap as 556. And it's our current military round. Technically, the M5, M7 has replaced it in 227 Fury. We'll see how that pans out. But for the foreseeable future, the 556 is probably the most common by volume rifle caliber in America, if you're listening in America. But the main advantage to me isn't even those things. The main advantage to me is weight. If you're talking about bugging out on foot and a bolt action centerfire rifle is your choice, it wouldn't be mine, but if it is yours, we go to that size and weight of ammo, right? If this is all the ammo you're going to have for this foreseeable future, do you want 500 rounds of 5.56 or 200 rounds of 308, right? It makes a difference. Also, where do you live? If you live in a real urban environment, people hive, Dallas, Fort Worth, metro area, which is like a big chunk of the entire state of Texas, I would consider one big urban city basically. Or the Northeast. A big chunk of the Northeast to me is just one giant, call it the New England Metroplex, metro area. It's a people hive. That's a different environment. And there's really nothing, that's a lot different environment than where I am at. I'm in what I would consider the Wild West section of America. Very sparsely populated, big animals, lots of flora and fauna. That's a different environment. You might be in an environment where you think that 223 is a better choice. And I'm not here to peen your Cheerios and tell you got to have 308. 223 would be a fine option for those reasons, especially size and weight of ammo. So that would be my second choice, and it was the second choice in the poll. So 5.56 223 is also a good choice. If you're talking about the scout rifle arena, the ones we talked about, some of them are available in 5.56 223. They're mostly, I think they're all available. All the scout rifles are available in 308. That is the predominant rifle caliber in scout rifles. But many are available in what the community jokingly calls the Cub Scout in 5.56. So that's going to be your second choice. And for many of the reasons the military went to it, it's lightweight, it's easy to carry, takes up less space, takes, less weight per round. It is less powerful per round, but you get the idea. It's got some real advantage there. Again, we talked about briefly the 30-06, but the 30-06 is perhaps the most versatile caliber. Probably my second choice besides 308, because I live in an area with big megafauna. And the 308 does pretty much what the 30-06 will do in a 150 grain bullet, but when you talk about bigger, heavier bullets, one of my go-to loads for the 06 is 220 grains. You're not getting any factory loads in 220 grain 308. I'd hate to see what the numbers would be, but they'd be anemic. But that's a go-to dangerous game load. And I live in a state with, mountain lions and black bears and brown bears and wolves. So mostly for the brown bear, the grizzly bear. But, and I have lived in Alaska. The 30-06 with heavier bullets, it's a more versatile cartridge, just put it that way. You can go down 110 grain, you can go up to 220 grain. It's the most versatile, so it deserves some consideration. It's also very common. Not as common as 308, 5.56, but really, really common. Another, and there's a whole category for other, but another one that's kind of forgotten is the 243. Now, if you don't want to go all the way down to the 223, you find it a bit anemic. Like maybe it's a round that's okay, the 223 for women and gender confused individuals, but for a man, 223 is not big enough. If you're in that camp, then you might look at 243. 243 is a lot closer on the spectrum if you look at the numbers to a proper full-powered rifle cartridge than 5.56, which is an intermediate rifle cartridge. 243 is a phenomenal choice. It's not as common, but it's not uncommon. It also, since the bulk of your weight in your rifle cartridge, a lot of that is in the projectile usually being made mostly of lead. So you get a lot of the power of the 308, but less of the overall weight. So 243 is worth considering. Another one that's really common today, one of the few more modern cartridges that really hung on, is the 6.5 Creedmoor. The 6.5 Creedmoor is a great cartridge. Again, ballistically in many ways superior to the 308. It's not nearly as common though. It's not uncommon. So 6.5 Creedmoor also really, really in there for consideration. I would really look at the 6.5 Creedmoor. You're not saving a lot of weight over the 308, but you're saving some. Also, unless you're talking about big, heavy bullets, you're kind of splitting hairs when you're talking about one being more powerful than the other. One may have a little bit better numbers, one's got higher sectional density, better ballistic coefficient. Long-range shooting is not what I would want in a rifle for the apocalypse. If you're more towards the long-range spectrum, the 6.5 Creedmoor obviously pulls ahead there. 6.5 Creedmoor is a good choice. It's kind of better in almost every way ballistically than the 308. I know, but it's not as available. It's not a standard NATO cartridge. It's not nearly as common. And economy of scale, it usually costs more. Now, if you're planning on packing up on only the best, most premium ammo, it's pretty even. Like if you're talking about, stocking up on trophy bonded bear claws or terminal ascent or, nozzler partitions or something like that, the difference is minimal. But if you're talking about just practicing a lot of cheap ammo, the 308 still pulls ahead there. So it's still my number one choice, but 6.5 Creedmoor bears some consideration. Another one that would be really good if I could think of a rifle that met all the criteria and a bolt action would be another intermediate cartridge, the 7.62x39. There are bolt action rifles made in it. I honestly can't think of a bolt action rifle made in it that has iron sights. There probably is one that it just doesn't come to mind. I know the older Ruger M77 stainless steel control round feed, many of the things that I like came in 7.62x39. Sadly, I don't know that it ever came with iron sights. Maybe it did. If it did, good option. Ruger still makes one in their kind of American rifle, but I don't know that any of them come with iron sights. I didn't even mention the Ruger American because most of those, if any of them do, I can't think of any that come with iron sights. And that's kind of a big deal to me. So we talked about caliber. Let us talk about optics. I said optics were a force multiplier. My number one pick for this, LPVO, low power variable optic. If it's a scout rifle, a true scout, and you want to mount a scout optic, that's fine. LPVO is going to be my number one choice. We're talking about 1.5 to whatever. 1 to 6. I really like 1 to 4s. I like a 1-inch tube because I like sleek and svelte. To me, that's more important than more magnification. You start getting into 1 to 6s, 1 to 8s, 1 to 10s. They start being obese when it comes to the rifle, which doesn't just add weight. To me, it makes them a little ungainly and a little less balanced, which to me, balance is important. Not often talked about. People often talk about, what's your MOA on your rifle? What magnification do you have? But they don't talk about weight and balance. And a big top-heavy, obese optic on my rifle is not what I want. In normal times, it's certainly not what I want for this type of rifle. So I like a 1-inch tube, low-power variable optic. My number one pick, and I'm not brand loyal. I don't get sponsored by any of these companies. I refuse sponsors because I don't want to be a bought and paid for shill. There's plenty of places you can go to get bought and paid for skewed, bribed content. Not here. But Leupold is my number one pick for many of the optics. Not always, but Leupold, I would look to see if they make something because I know their stuff is rugged. Will they break? Sure. If I take it and use it to beat the lug nuts loose on my car, I'll probably break the optic. But Leupold optics are some of the most rugged and robust that I'm aware of. Period. You can get nicer optics that cost a lot more money, and there's nothing wrong with looking at Nighthawk for this or some other companies, SWFA. But my standard is going to be look at Leupold, see if they make something. If not, get another good, rugged, robust optic. But LPVO is my number one choice. My second choice may surprise some of you, and that's going to be a fixed power scope. Not real common today, but if you look at like an exploded view, which I realized talking in the group chat that a lot of the younger people may not, even older people, maybe it's just me. When exploded view is like an exploded diorama of the parts that make up a thing, a car engine, a watch, and this thing, a scope. It's like a diagram with little lines that show where everything goes together. If you look at an exploded diagram of a variable powered scope and a fixed powered scope, fixed powered scopes are a lot simpler in general. Simple is good, especially when it comes to optics. Less likely to break in general. So my next choice would be a fixed optic. Somewhere in the same range that the LPVO would be, but like a fixed 2.5, a fixed 4. Those would be my second choice. My third choice would be a red dot. Depending on your place, if you live, again, depending on geography, I'm looking out at an ocean, a proverbial ocean of grassland, of high prairie surrounded by mountains. I can see a long way. But if you live in what I would call the giant people hive of America, the Northeast, east of the Mississippi and north of the Mason-Dixon, or, really, east of the Mississippi, east of the Mississippi, that's a people hive to me. Might always be one big city as far as I'm concerned, with little pockets of not city. When you're talking about that kind of area, a red dot might be better for you. Actually, before the red dot, not as common, but a prism sight is probably better, because a prism sight usually has an etched reticle, which means even if there's no batteries in it, it will still work. I like that. So next would be a prism optic, and there are some good prism optics made. Sadly, a lot of these are made for AR type rifles, which makes sense, but you generally will get a higher height over bore, because, without getting too technical, the operating system of most ARs requires a buffer tube, which means it's in a straight line, which means the optic is usually much higher than a traditional rifle. So it might not work well with most prism sights on this type of rifle. But if you can find one that works, a prism sight is probably a better choice, again, because they have that etched reticle. They're a pretty rugged and robust design. They're not as common, and they're usually more expensive than a lot of red dots, but probably a better choice for this. Next would be a red dot. Is a red dot going to last forever? No. Is it going to last anywhere near as long as a rifle? Probably not. But again, you got your backup iron sights. It's a force multiplier while you got it, and when you run the course of that red dot's life out, you take it off and throw it away, and you still have a good iron sighted rifle. So that'd be another choice. One of my last choice would be the most common that you see on many bolt action rifles, like a 3-9. 3-9 is fine if you sit on a stand and you shoot deer over a corn pile at 100 yards. But I don't like a 3-9 for most things. It's way too much optic for me. Because if we're talking about this is going to be your one long gun for the alpaca lips, if we're talking about doing up-close personal CQB type stuff, which I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps, that's a big bulk of modern combat. I don't want a 3-9. So that's going to be one of my last choices for an optic. Now, I do want to mention a lot of people focus on the optic and they forget about the mounts. The mounts are as important as the optic. It's a system. You got to have good rifle, you got to have good mounts, and you got to have a good optic. If you have a really good expensive optic and crap mounts, then that kind of defeats the whole purpose of having a good optic. The optic is only as good as the mounts that it's mounted on. Good optics. Again, I'm not brand loyal here, but a couple of really good options are the Warren Quick Detach. That's a good, not crazy expensive, rugged option. I'm not saying that a quick detach system is a go or no-go, but it's really nice. Again, if you break that optic, you can twist it off with your hands and throw the optic away. You could literally be running to cover, take the optic off, and re-engage with iron sights. That's kind of nice. My second choice would be something with a big bolt on it, because although not as fast to take off, you could just take a multi-tool, which hopefully you'll have some kind of tool in the apocalypse, like a Leatherman, and take it off and throw it away. My choice after that would be a simple one-slot old-school flathead type mount, because you can probably, even if you can't find a flathead screwdriver, which you probably can, you'll probably find something flat and thin to put in there, like a quarter, and take that thing off. So those mounts are really important. My least favorite, but often very common today, is something with a bunch of little T25 Torx type bit heads, which you pretty much need a specific tool for that, and a small one. Now, if you do run that kind of optics mount, even if you have the tool, you're probably not taking it off quickly. If you do have that kind of rifle, take that tool and mount it somewhere on the rifle. I don't care if you duct tape it to the stock. I don't care if you put it in a hollow in the stock. But if you need a tool to take off the optic, probably have that tool on the rifle somewhere. That's just we'll use that as a tactical tip for the day. If you need a tool for that rifle specifically, for any kind of routine maintenance or for the optics mount or something, have that tool attached to the rifle if it's a rifle like this for a life-saving implement. Many modern rifle stocks, especially the polymer ones, are hollow. You might want to put like an extra round back there, or if it fits, an extra magazine with rounds in it back there. A bore snake, the tool we talked about, stuff like that in the stock. That'll be your tactical tip of the day. Usually I put it in at the end, but it's a good thing to put in here, so let's shove it in. Now, I want to kind of conclude this with what can we deduce from these top picks for a survival bolt-action rifle? What are some common traits? If we drew a Venn diagram with a bunch of different circles, where would a majority of these rifles overlap? Okay, so a general purpose rifle, right? Not a one-trick pony. Despite whatever fantasy you might have, you're probably not going to be a sniper in the apocalypse. If you are, you'd better have a team of guys that are handling everything else. If you have to move through a city, your sniper rifle is not a great option. While you're moving through the city, if you get set up in Overwatch as a designated marksman or something, that's fine. But you want a general purpose rifle, and that's one of the biggest things here. You want a general purpose rifle. It's good at a variety of situations. Like 300 Win Mag is a fine cartridge. It's a better cartridge than most of the ones we talked about today on the list for if you were going to hunt brown bear or if you were going to hunt moose. And maybe you'd get to hunt a moose in the apocalypse and not need a tag for it. In all my years of hunting, I've never drawn a moose tag. I've been hunting a long time. But it's possible, and if that was the scenario in that specific situation, a 300 Win Mag or a 338 or a 35 Whalen would be a better choice. That 35 Whalen is not a great choice if you're kicking down doors. So a general purpose rifle, that's one of the biggest overarching centers of this Venn diagram. General purpose. Size and weight. One of the reasons I started out with the scout rifle is size and weight. We talk about not being a one-trick pony and being generalist. You want a light, handy rifle. And light and handy don't always go together, but they often go together. Kind of like soft and fluffy. You could have one or the other, but they generally go together. Light and handy rifles generally go together. You know, a PRS rifle would be great if you planned on flopping out of your truck during the apocalypse and throwing the rifle on a tripod because it weighs 18 pounds, then having some kind of post-apocalyptic Walmart rascal scooter with four-wheel drive to get around. But if you got to carry that thing, if you got to ruck that rifle, you don't want a PRS rifle. You don't want an 18-pound abomination of a rifle for this. Light and handy is also really important. Another really, really important one is iron sights. It's every option I put on the table today, backup iron sights. That's like a go no-go gauge to me for this. It's got to have backup iron sights. If I am intentionally choosing a bolt action rifle for this role, I want it to have backup iron sights. I thought about justifying that and talking about it, but I don't think I have to. I think you probably know intuitively that however rugged that optic is, you probably want backup iron sights. Also, maybe not a pure go no-go. I would just run a rifle with just really good iron sights. But I really, really would like an optic. An optic is a force multiplier. I would like the ability not just to have some kind of optic, but to mount a good optic, which means a good modern optics mounting system. That's important to me. Available in a common, easy to get caliber. 6 arc might be great ballistically. I don't want a 6 arc for this. That's kind of a one-trick pony niche round. That is not a general purpose round to me. What are the odds of you finding 6 arc if things go sideways? Probably not good. So common caliber is a theme here. And common doesn't have to mean NATO specifically, but 5.56, 308, even 30-06 and 243 are fairly common. So a common round. I would say rugged and robust, but in general, most good modern, not all, but most good and modern bolt action rifles are pretty rugged and robust. Even the ones that are less rugged, like a Remington 700, are still pretty rugged. I'd still say they're more reliable than, let's say, an AR-15. So all of them are pretty rugged and reliable. So that's a pretty good commonality there. the odds of you breaking something aren't great, so less important on the Venn diagram, less overlap would be commonality of parts. Because again, even if you do break something like an extractor, extractors are pretty small. We talked about, store it in the stock, tape it to the rifle. But there's not a whole lot of moving parts on many of these bolt-action rifles. That's one of the big advantages. There's probably still quite a few. Again, a milsurp wouldn't be my first choice, so there's probably still some Japanese Arasakas and Mauser 98s kicking around from a long, long time ago that are still all original parts and still work just fine. So they're all kind of rugged and robust with few moving parts. But if I can have a common system where I might be able to find parts or get parts, that's pretty important. Things that are less important but that I still personally, and I will put this in the personal category for me that I like controlled round feet if I'm talking bolt action. I also really like stainless steel. Those are pretty important to me. They may not be important to you. If you live in Arizona, stainless steel may have little or no importance to you. Anyway, those are some of my thoughts and some things that you might want to consider if you're talking about bolt-action rifles for the end of the world, for a survival rifle, for a long-term, grid-down, hard times tool, however you define it. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Guys, if you did, been doing this podcast for a lot of years. Been digging into savings for a lot of years. I recently took on another job as let's just say a hired gun, a private contractor, to make money to build the savings back up again. But the goal, God willing, is to someday make this a full-time income. If you want to help that come true, if you want to help support this podcast, if you think you got something, not a pity party, but if you think that you got some value out of this and you want to give that value back, consider becoming a patron. Mostly because you want to support the podcast, but also patrons get a lot of cool insider-only content. Content that you're just not going to get unless you're a really good hacker or you actually become a patron. So consider becoming a patron. There's a Patreon link in the show notes. With that, we talked about a tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. Because spiritual survival is more important. Eternal salvation is the ultimate goal. If you win 100 gunfights, if you make it through the apocalypse for decades, and you die and go to hell, you lost. Game over. You missed the point. Your eternal salvation, that is more real than physical stuff, the eternal, the spiritual. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. I think that's a good and fitting verse for this episode. Thank you, and have a blessed day.